our new homes.
Our family was placed in a house together with the Vonog's family, also from Skrunda. Lymanus Vonog's was a little older than me and helped us a lot. But the house was old and rotten and eventually collapsed. The Vonog's family moved to a collective farm in the nearest village. We were moved to a house where some men from Latvia and another family lived. There was not a landlord in Latvian, Saimnieka, there, but the bedbugs, Saimniekoja, were in charge. Horrors. But this wooden log house was better, and it contained heat in winter. During the first winter, my brother Amance and I wanted to get good firewood from the forest. We borrowed a saw from the neighbors, but we could not sharpen the teeth on the saw because we did not have a file. In the woods, the snow was up to our waists. We concluded that if a tree has neither needles nor leaves, then it is a dry tree and suitable for stoking a fire. We spotted a dry tree and we sawed, and finally the tree fell. It was a frozen larch. With just as much difficulty, we cut it to pieces that we could drag home. We chopped it into firewood and put it in the oven, but it would not burn. How could we, as children, know it wasn't hot enough in the thin metal oven to burn wet wood? We looked for leftover smaller logs outside the sawmill's territory in the coming winters. It was difficult keeping the firewood. It disappeared at night because there were no firewood sheds, no fences, no guard dogs. We didn't live there very long, though, because the owner appeared. Our mother, who was a seamstress and sewed clothes for others, found the next place for us to live. She was very well known for her skills. In a recently built house lived an old woman, whose son had fallen in the war. She moved in with her relatives and sold the house to our mother. Mother paid for the house by sewing the old woman's clothes and also giving our best things because we didn't have any money. It was a trivial price. The old woman took pity on Mother because she had to provide care for 4 children. The wooden house was small with one small room and an even smaller kitchen, but it was located in a beautiful place, at the confluence of 2 rivers.
Work and bread.
In our first year there, we could get bread by using ration cards, but we couldn't exist on bread alone, so we cooked soups from nettles and other weeds. Winter was the most difficult time, because there was neither work nor winter clothes. We wrapped all kinds of rags around our feet, but they wore out and our feet froze. I had an idea. I would tie small boards to my feet using string. In order for the string to last, I burned a hole crosswise in the board with a hot wire to allow the string to go through the board. The stove in the middle of our room had to be stoked all night, but we had to be thrifty with the firewood because we could not get very much. The sawmill was large and spacious. There were 2 gang saw frames which worked smoothly, powered by a locomotive. The logs went through at a terrible pace, through the flashing saws. The sawdust fell in the box under the saws, and was carried to the firebox of the locomotive. If the locomotive had enough of the sawdust, it was put in a pile. Both saws were served with 1 empty box. My mother and I worked on the sawdust without rest. It was a beastly job. As soon as we emptied 1 box, it was time to change it out for the next box. The boards which were cut out of logs at the sawmill were probably sent for the needs of the war. No vehicles went through the deep snow. New soldiers were sent on skis, and each 2 soldiers carried 1 board to the railway station. They couldn't carry very much, so eventually the boards were stacked in a big pile. It was interesting how the boards were piled. The soldiers brought a board from the saws, and the middle of the board was put on a support which was as tall as a man. One end was pulled down and the other end rose to the top of the pile. Then the soldiers pushed the board upwards. I put together the boards while the stack was low, because when the pile got higher, I was not useful either at the top or at the bottom. A boy's strength was too little.
Forgetting the life of a martyr.
I wanted to go skiing in winter. There were big mountains all around, covered with a thick layer of snow, smooth slopes, and good skiing. It was such a wonderful view in the sunlight. Sometimes it made me forget our poor life of suffering. I built the skis myself. I found 2 boards in the sawmill. I thinned and smoothed them. I then put the ends in a bucket of boiling water and kept them in there for a while. Then I bent them around a barrel which served as a furnace. I carefully trimmed them with a pocket knife and the skis were ready. In Siberia, the mountains are so big that it takes a whole day to climb them. After I climbed up one mountain, I found it interesting that behind a small valley I would find a higher mountain, and one after the other. Then I could see the highest mountain all the time. It was about 100 kilometers to the west, where the sun sets. I started skiing on the lowest mountain. When I had successfully descended and became more confident, I started skiing on a higher mountain. That's how I reached the highest mountain. I was going down at a very high speed. My insides tickled. There were places where I was flying. I had succeeded. In other circumstances, I could have become a prominent athlete. The mountains were covered with trees, and I could have skied into a tree. The snow from the tips of the skis hit upwards directly into my eyes, because I didn't have goggles. But I had no accident. I had only one stick, and it served as a rudder. I skillfully went around all of the trees. That was the greatest joy of my childhood days.
Siberian summers.
In the spring, the snow thinned out and melted. The warm weather came very quickly. Nature is very beautiful in Siberia. In the open nature, flowers grow there, which in Latvia must be grown in a hothouse. The forests are large and impressive. There is nothing decaying underneath, but it smells like resin and flowers. Cedars grow twice as tall as all the trees around them. The only trouble in the summer was caused by small flies, which are called mosquitoes. There was no escaping them. They crawled along the cuffs, along the neck, and ran into the eyes, ears, and nose. To keep the mosquitoes away, people used a kind of black grease, like wheel grease. They applied it to the hands, the neck, and the face. But the grease was irritating and made my skin hurt. They also wove fine nets from horses' tails, sewed cloth around them, and we would wear them over our heads. But the mosquitoes still found ways to creep in behind the mesh. They would begin sucking, and my face and eyes would swell. There was sand at the end of the house, near the foundations. On summer days, it got so hot that we could fry potatoes and eggs on it. We couldn't walk on the sand or the ground in bare feet, because our feet would get burned. In the summer, the berries grew and ripened within a couple of months. In the forest, we children were once eating big and delicious raspberries. We couldn't understand what was rustling and stomping on the other side of the raspberry bushes. We looked, and there was a big, brown bear. Horrors! But the bear would eat and eat without seeming disturbed, and then he left. We children also filled our bellies. In summer, bears are peaceful if they are well fed. But in winter, if the lumberjacks disturbed a bear from hibernation, then they were dangerous. They can attack and tear in a rage. Wolves, on the other hand, are dangerous the whole year. They come out of the forest from the direction of the big mountain.
Pulled ashore.
Needing food, I fished so I would have something to eat. At first, I made hooks from wires, and later from my mother's pins. But they did not hold up. They bent and broke. A local blacksmith forged several hooks that he gave to me for fishing. I tied them to a rope, 1 each meter. I put that in the river for the night feeders. The blacksmith told me to tie the end to a rock on the shore, because sometimes the stone, lines, and hooks disappeared. I put the string around the rock and put the rock waist deep in the water. I knew where it was. It was still dark when I left. While I was away, it had rained. The next morning, I went out before sunrise, before the fish would become active. But I couldn't see the rock in the dark. The river had gone up overnight due to the rain. I looked for my night hooks for a long time and finally found them with my feet, but now at a greater depth. The water was up to my neck, and there was little slack in the string because there was something on the other end. There were also trees floating in the river, and many logs had piled up near my bank. I pulled and pulled the line onto the shore. It's very heavy. In the murky water, I saw a very big fish coming towards me, quite horrible, with its mouth open. I was very scared. Suddenly, the fish moves and one of the loose hooks pierces my right hand. The fish begins pulling me to the bottom. I tried to grab anything with my hands to hold on, but my head was underwater. Eventually, I got my feet on the ground. The problem is I am next to a sawmill, and nearby there are logs floating down the river. I understand that I can be dragged under the logs. When I managed to put my head above water, I took a breath. The fish and I fought for half an hour. My hand was hurting and my blood was flowing. I avoided the logs and made it to the shore in desperation with my last strength. I grabbed something wooden, maybe a branch, with my left hand, and I successfully hit the fish over the head with it. I saw that my right hand was torn. But the really scary thing was all of my teeth started to hurt and move about. To escape the immense pain, I pulled them all out myself, leaving only one molar. The old blacksmith told me to eat a root called cherumsha, which has a mild garlic flavor. Miraculously, I grew new teeth, and today when I go to the dentist, they say that my teeth do not need to be drilled,